Okay, so welcome everyone. We're going to go right into discussion on our higher purpose as a tenet within conscious capitalism. And I'm going to share my screen, as I mentioned, and we'll just kind of start digging in. Questions are welcome at any time. Let me just get this oriented so that you can see it better. And of course, the Zoom thing is in the way. Okay, great. So we call this the first tenet, and it definitely is sort of, as I do work with clients that are interested in building a conscious business, even though the tenets aren't necessarily to be in a priority order. And so you always kind of have to start here with higher purpose. And because that's really the driving force or guidance or compass that a company will be using to make decisions around the other tenets. And just as a quick refresher, the other tenets are conscious culture, conscious leadership, and stakeholder orientation. So the higher purpose guides how you would approach the other tenets. And so we always start here with a discussion around higher purpose. Now, you have probably heard or thought about purpose of a company many times. And we also see that often from a marketing perspective as well. Sometimes marketing maybe as a tagline or maybe as a corporate social responsibility type of agenda or initiative, if that's familiar to you. And we're really talking about something different within conscious capitalism. We're talking about something that deeply inspires and motivates people to do the best work of their lives to solve a worthy problem in the world. And if you think about the foundation of conscious capitalism, it is that business is here to elevate humanity. So you think about like the one thing that conscious capitalism talks about is business is here to elevate humanity, and that business is in a unique position to elevate humanity, uniquely positioned outside of the other entities that might be working on social or societal types of issues or issues that we need to collectively work on. Government has a place, but lots of restrictions or impediments. Nonprofits have a place and lots of restrictions and impediments. What we say in conscious capitalism is it's the for-profit business that has the ability to divert its profit to determine how to solve worthy problems in the world. That is the foundation of conscious capitalism. And so it's not profit it's not doing work for the purpose of making money. It is making money to address your higher purpose. So we think of business now as businesses to make money, or many people do. And that's sort of the traditional definition. And that is kind of what we all expect collectively as a society, that's the reason why business exists. The shareholders make their money. It goes back to like the 70s and sometimes even beyond that, with many economists saying that was the purpose of business. And technically, what we're all saying now, particularly those in the conscious capitalism and conscious business movement, is that's not the purpose of business. The purpose of business is to designate your higher purpose as an organization, which is the worthy problem you're going to solve in the world. And that the reason you want to be profitable and need to be profitable is that you are putting that profit towards solving that worthy problem. Make sense so far? So this is a very deep, ingrained, embedded, DNA-related thing in a company. It's not a marketing thing. It's not a tagline. It's not like our mission or our vision. It's the deep why we exist as a company. And really, if you ask many CEOs and founders, and I work with wonderful CEOs and founders that are already in this mindset, if you ask them what's the higher purpose of their business, it's really hard to answer that initially. Like it takes some work to figure that out. And what it's designed to do is it should be something that gives everyone that's working towards that's aligned with that particular purpose, deep motivation, inspiration, almost like a chills. Oh, this is what I'm getting to work on. Like it is something that is really deeply inspiring. And that's kind of the standard to which we talk about higher purpose in conscious capitalism. So I'm going to start flipping through some slides. Some of this will be a little bit kind like a continual theme that you'll see. I already addressed this slide, which is these are the 4 different tenets. They are numbered, but the other ones are in no particular order. As I mentioned, higher purpose definitely is a place to start. And the rest of the sessions, as I already mentioned, will cover these others. And so it's really a question of when a business has a higher purpose, which we've already kind of covered, of like solving a worthy problem in the world. What I'm interested in is, does any businesses come to mind for you as either people who have worked in companies or currently work in companies or in the past, or as consumers, where you have an opportunity either as an employee to vote with your time or as a consumer to vote with your dollars? Have you worked in companies where you were like, this totally is aligned and I feel I have a higher purpose as a result of working here. I have meaningful work as a result of working here. And I know what the higher purpose of this business is, either as a consumer or as an employee. Anyone had that experience?
I certainly have with, I mean, in Maine, I can think of like Coffee by Design. I just love going in there and their whole feel and her commitment to community, and Maine Brewing. Apparently I drink coffee and beer is on my mind or something, but I know the work just because I've worked with David at Bangor Savings. I know you guys are really doing beautiful work, and Kevin Hancock at Hancock Lumber, just for some examples of places that
Great examples. Yeah, we have many, and many of those companies, if not all of them, are a member of the Conscious Capitalism community and have either been on panels or talking or speaking to talk about their work. And so, yes, we have a lot of local engagement and great examples. There's other, more common companies that, outside of Maine. And one of the ones that we kind of look at as the poster company for higher purpose and also for being a conscious business, which have been doing this for years and years and years, far before conscious business even existed as a term, is Patagonia. So if you're familiar with Patagonia, their higher purpose, well, you know what they do as a company, right? They're a retail organization, right? They sell really nice and pretty expensive clothing, right? And all with a recycled mindset and all sorts of different wonderful environmental efforts. But their purpose, their higher purpose, is to save our home planet. So what they're saying is, okay, this retail stuff that we do is important because it's profitable, and we are doing it in the least impactful way on our earth, and in fact trying to figure out a way to do it completely regeneratively. But it's a means to an end of saving our home planet. And the profit that we are making is going towards that. And not only do they have a retail arm, but they have an education arm of their organization. So once they set up that we want to save our whole planet, well, how do we best do that? How do we actually fulfill that higher purpose? Well, retail is profitable, and we can actually change the clothing industry, which is the number 2 polluting industry in the world. So we can influence that, and that's important. But we also need to educate our world around what are the issues that we need to address to save our home planet. So they have a whole movie division at Patagonia. If you haven't seen any of their movies, they're fantastic. So that's just an example of when you've articulated that higher purpose and everyone is aligned towards it, it creates some innovation and ingenuity that you wouldn't expect to necessarily come from that particular place, in this case, the retail industry. I have another client that works in financial services. And when they articulated their purpose, what it caused them to do is start to think about, well, what other lines of business might we be operating that wasn't even in our purview before thinking about this higher purpose? And the higher purpose ends up being so meaningful that every decision returns to it. So it's really powerful when you can articulate this, because then when you're making a decision about prioritization, because every business, at least in my experience, one of the number 1 struggles, and including in my own business, is how do you prioritize things? And when you have a higher purpose, that compass that we talked about, that becomes much easier because say, what is the most impactful, meaningful work we can do to achieve our purpose, our higher purpose? And then things line up much easier, because almost everything looks really interesting when you're running a business, like, oh, that could go that way, go that. But if you ask the question, what is the most highly impactful and meaningful way to achieve our higher purpose, it narrows the field quite a bit. So this is a great quote about, right, the blind pursuit of profit at all costs is untenable. And I had a colleague that said one time around this sort of blind pursuit of profit, that we accept that as a society generally, present company excluded, because I'm sure you wouldn't be here otherwise, but in society, you'll see this all over the place. And I'm sure you recognize that. And it's very strange because there's no other place in our society, or very few places in our society, where you can think about excess being so accepted. And so like, they use the analogy, I heard a friend say one time, like, it would be like someone saying, like, I'm just going to continue to eat and eat and eat and eat as much as I possibly can, and not think there's a consequence to that. And it's the same kind of attitude that we've had about money. Like, we just have to grow, make. Profit. Towards what? For what? And so that's what this really talks about. And it's not, I think we all probably recognize it's not sustainable. And that's what we're here to talk about, is how do we make it sustainable and how do we make it more meaningful? And you probably know that more and more at all age levels, all generations, the number one criteria for people when they're going to work is that the work is meaningful. Yeah. So there's really no more powerful thing a company can do than articulating its higher purpose from a attraction of talent and a retention of talent standpoint. And in particular right now, that is incredibly important, because we have shortages all over the place of not enough employees to get the work done. And so being able to articulate and differentiate a company, but with that higher purpose, is incredibly important, because you'll pull or attract the employees to you that really resonates with, and then things start to really get aligned and get sustainable and successful. Any questions or comments so far? Okay, I'm going to keep going just so we can kind of make up a little bit of time. So there is a difference, as I mentioned before, around vision, mission, and purpose. And these are all very confused generally. And I'd say, like, don't get too wrapped up in it, except for when we think about purpose in that third column, the difference you want to make in the world, the worthy problem you want to solve, that's really at a high level, your fundamental why. When you think about the vision, and many companies have an articulated vision, and they might say to you, oh yeah, we have a purpose, it's our vision. But the vision should really be, what does the world look like after your purpose is fulfilled? How will the world look differently? And then the mission is like the strategy, how are you going to get this done? So for Patagonia, as an example, Save Our Home Planet is their purpose. Their vision is that we actually have created a carbon neutral and restored or regenerated all of what we take from the earth, which is amazing vision. And then their mission is, we do that through retail clothing line, we do that through movie production, we do that through a number of different elements of the business and their particular strategy. Does that make sense? If you haven't read Yvonne Chouinard's book, Let My People Go Surfing, that's super fun read. And very inspiring. Okay, so then they have a few examples, and some of this, sometimes people say, like, I'm not sure about Whole Foods today. I'm not sure, like, about this company. And so, understand all those comments. But these are some examples of companies that have spent time really, working on articulating their purpose. And if you weren't aware, conscious capitalism really started with a book called Conscious Capitalism. And it's written by John Mackey and Raj Sisodia. John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods, and Raj Sisodia, who's a marketing professor. And they came together through kind of an interesting story of circumstances, and both had a mindset around conscious capitalism, but it hadn't been named that. And then they wrote the book together. And the story goes, Whole Foods, as everyone often points out, is like, Whole Foods is owned by Amazon. You could argue Amazon is certainly not a conscious company. And Whole Foods is owned now by Amazon and sitting inside potentially an unconscious company, and is learning how to practice what they believe fundamentally, as founded by John Mackey, on how business should be done in a very different type of structure. So we're still waiting to see, of course, how that will play out. But one of the reasons why that existed, you may remember we talked about this previously if you were here, is that Whole Foods was getting attacked by activist investors saying that Whole Foods was not maximizing profit, and that was required by the shareholders. In order to get cover from those activist investors, and if you've seen anything play out with activist investors, sometimes, in my opinion, it's awesome because the activist investor does something to hold a company accountable that probably needs that. In this case, the activist investors were forcing Whole Foods to make decisions that were contrary to their values and to their higher purpose. And so John Mackey needed shield or cover and chose to get that under Amazon. So the story still unfolds. But here's some other examples of companies. The Motley Fool has been involved with conscious capitalism since almost the very beginning. And they're a super fun, interesting company to look into if you're not sure about or haven't heard of them. Another example of a higher purpose with IGS Energy. And this quote really goes to the fact that people are really looking for that meaningful work, which I think we all know and have directly experienced. Richard Branson is one of the founders of the B Team. And the B Team is another organization, a sister organization that works alongside conscious capitalism to really spread how to do good with business and make business into a force for good. Although in conscious capitalism, we hesitate to talk about that particular term too much. It's used a lot in the conscious business space, business as a force for good. And why that's a little bit problematic is it kind of pits business as like a good versus bad thing. And what we'd say in conscious capitalism is all businesses are likely good in some way. They're employing people, they're allowing people to hopefully buy homes and food and care for their family. Like there's inherently something good about business, but we can expect more from business. And that's what we talk about in conscious capitalism, not necessarily the duality of some businesses are good and some businesses are bad. So what we know definitively through lots of research is when a company has articulated their higher purpose and taken the time to do that, which is a deliberate process to go through, then they have exponentially more success because of the reasons we've been talking about here. People are drawn to be doing that work, whether as an employee or as a stakeholder of some kind. It could be a community member, could be a customer, could be a supplier, that people want to work with organizations where that purpose is clearly articulated and it resonates with them. And we all want to be part of something greater and create connection. So you can see some growth rate information here around, ironically, when you do this, you actually make more money. So the great thing is then you actually have more money to achieve your higher purpose. And if we're all doing it in this way, then we're solving more problems in our world. Does that make sense so far? Everybody good? Okay. So there are some things that often come up in the discussion around purpose and called myths and misconceptions. And the first one is we kind of already tackled around, it should be the brand's slogan. What you really want to create is full alignment with your purpose inside and outside the business, because that means you'll attract the people that you want to be working with as stakeholders, but it is not intended to be marketing. So for instance, when I'm taking clients through what we call discovering their purpose, they often do get tripped up because we're in such a marketing frame of mind around like, how would we describe this to our customers? And what we have to continuously talk about is, this is for you. We'll figure out the customer part later. This is for you and your organization to really articulate that, have it resonate with all of you and motivate you and inspire you to move forward. And so it may be after that's determined internally that it is certainly shared in some personal, authentic way with stakeholders that interact with the organization, which is perfect and great. But what ends up being a blocker is if people are thinking like, I need to come up with just do it like Nike has, or I need to come up with like some marketing tagline, and that's not what it's about. Because marketing is marketing, purpose is authentic, deep, embedded, resonant. And then purpose is that CSR means corporate social responsibility. So in a previous life, I led a corporate social responsibility strategy. And what that ends up being very often in organizations is what I might consider like a bolt-on. Like it's something that is an initiative that a company does, sometimes because they think they're supposed to do it as the company. And they have, the initiative is around employee, what they do for their employees and what they do for the environment and what they do for supplier diversity, potentially, usually in those categories, what they might do in the community. So there's a number of important things that businesses may do under corporate social responsibility, but you can think about that as a very early stage of maturity in thinking about purpose. Because what tends to happen is those corporate social responsibility strategies are a nice to have when the company can have them, but are often the things that get cut or ignored when times might get tough within the organization. And what we're talking about with purpose is it's core to everything the organization does. It's not anything that can be cut out. And it's also a key decision-making tool. So when I ran corporate social responsibility in the past, the thing that was really abundantly clear is because it was an add-on, it was an afterthought in decision-making. It wasn't fully embedded into the decision-making process. It wasn't on the minds of the C-suite as they were making key business decisions. And that's not necessarily, the fault of anyone. It's just the way that actually CSR works, because it's a bolt-on. It's like a program, a separate program or initiative. Whereas what we're talking about with purpose is the C-suite is all like fundamentally aligned and constantly thinking about how to fulfill the purpose. It's a key role of leadership. A key role of a conscious leader is to fulfill the purpose of the business. And so every decision that they are making should be balanced against, is this the highest and most impactful way to fulfill our purpose? Whereas CSR would be, we're going to report on something that we made a decision about afterwards. And then purpose is employees to feel good about your work. We've talked about that is an outcome often, but that's not the reason you're doing it. Because you can't, I'm sure you've all worked with employees, like there's no way to actually make every single employee happy and no way to align your purpose or anything you do in a company that matches every single person in the company. It's like not the purpose of this work to do that. But what it does is call the people in, the stakeholders, whether it be employee, customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders, to your purpose and to doing work with you. But you're doing it really for the purpose of that declaration of that guidance, that compass, not for any other reason. And then that purpose is owned by the CEO of the business. So it's you can imagine, like any time that something is owned by the CEO of a business, there's a inherent problem in there, that there's a succession plan issue because the CEO of the business is not always the CEO. And so when you have transition of CEOs, if the CEO only owns it and it's not deeply embedded into the way that decision-making is done in the organization, then it's fragile and in jeopardy. And you might have seen examples of that happening. Danone is a great example of that. So the leader of Danone was really spearheading, if you didn't see this in the press, moving Danone, which has been the largest multinational corporation practicing conscious business. And the CEO there felt very passionate about that. And this also happened with Unilever, with the leader of Unilever in the past too, led by the CEOs. Of course, the CEO has to have a leadership role. But if you don't have alignment of the board and you don't have alignment of the leadership team, then they can all decide that no longer fits their philosophy. And that is what happened in both of those cases. So it's not to be understated how important it is for CEOs who have this passion around building conscious businesses and thinking about the higher purpose, that there's lots of ways to embed it within the organization much more deeply than just with the CEO. And so that's why we point that out there. Just definitely stop me if you have questions. So when an organization is discovering their purpose, the goal is to create a purpose statement. And then you're going to integrate your purpose internally and externally. So we call that kind of like purpose activation, internally and externally. And often you're starting just in that order. Internally, you're starting with activating the purpose and figuring out what are the ways that we should be doing this. And often that starts with, are we factoring our purpose into our decision-making as a key sort of litmus test? The purpose statement, just to give you a sense of how that's done under conscious capitalism, is a very inclusive process with a team, and an organization determines like how big that team is and how many stakeholders are involved within the organization. But the more their involvement there is, the better. And then when they've come up with some potential draft statements that are really resonant with that group, they then go out and survey, for lack of a better term, their stakeholders. And under conscious capitalism, you have at least 6 different stakeholders that you might be checking in with around that. So you have, as we've already talked about, customers and employees. Those are readily thought of. Your shareholders, owners, investors, whatever is the right word for your business, suppliers, the community, and the earth or the environment. So, which is a little bit like, well, how would I go check with the earth about whether it likes our purpose or not? That takes some creativity, but it can be done. And you engage with community members that do earth-related work, environmental-related work, to see how they would interpret your purpose and what else they would say. So you're creating a sort of declaration of a number of different potential purposes. And I did this with my business as an example. So I drafted for myself, like, here are the 3 purpose statements that resonate with me, but I'd love to get other input about what other people think about when they read these purpose statements. And when I did do that and got input, and I see this with clients all the time, it is amazing what stakeholders will come back with their different perspectives and the wisdom that they have, or the word choices that constantly throw people off, like that you would never imagine until you're gathering diverse feedback. So you're gathering that diverse feedback and then taking that in and factoring it into which is the most resonant purpose statement for us, given that we've now been informed by our stakeholders also what they think about this. And you're doing this, of course, with trusted stakeholders that you want their input and would want to help you with this process. And then once you've declared that purpose, then the internal piece is, as I said, the decision making and checking on that. And is everyone clear on what the purpose is? And how do we put programs and processes together inside to make that happen? And then how do we communicate that externally with all of our different stakeholders?
So Tara, have you finalized your purpose statement?
Oh yeah, I did that a number of years ago, actually. It was the first thing I did, because that would be really disingenuous if I was practicing conscious capitalism and not.
No, I was just curious as to what you landed on.
Yeah, mine is inspire life through work.
Nice.
That's my purpose of my business. Yeah. So and it still resonates today. And Elise, if she's still on the call, when she joined my team, we talked about that and made sure that it also, resonated with her and made sense to her, and have been doing an update on that. So it was really important to me with how much time people spend in work or at work, to have work be an inspiring place for people. And part of my motivation for opening my business was that for too many people that I saw over the course of my 25-year career working inside companies, work was depleting and not inspiring. And I wanted to create environments where that was the case. But I only landed on that because I got a lot of feedback from stakeholders about different opinions on my drafts, and them saying, that doesn't make sense, or what are you even talking about? Or like, it helped really to zone in on that. And I see that with my clients all the time too, that the feedback is incredibly important.
And for finding the right partners as you move along, whether it's employees or your customers and suppliers.
Yeah. And just putting that out there, even saying it out in the world, not even necessarily putting on a website, the universe delivers. So Salesforce is kind of an interesting company. Mark Benioff is quite the conscious capitalist, leading a very profitable, very capitalist, you might say, company. And some of these things, it's sort of like really interesting to see how it plays out, because it doesn't just, the CEO has to certainly lead it, and it has to be something that they feel passionate about, but it also, in bigger companies, takes a lot, because those bigger companies are in are systems upon systems of different ways of doing work that are often based on traditional capitalist mentality that take a long time to rewrite or rewire. And so some of these interesting leaders that are sort of charging ahead in this space, particularly with the larger companies, you might find plenty of examples where they're not conscious, but they're on the journey. And that's one of the things we always say in the conscious capitalism movement, and really any movement in the B economy, is there is no company that is perfect. There is no company that is following every element of the conscious capitalism tenets. No, there's not even one example. Everyone is on a journey at some place on the journey, and we respect where everyone is on that journey, and we respect that everyone is trying to evolve and do better at every point. If you haven't heard of Imperative 21, I'd suggest checking out that website. That's a collaboration of a number of different conscious business movements, including conscious capitalism, talking about how to combine forces and efforts in order to change how our economic system actually works. And then the other one that's super interesting, and it's with the bigger companies in the United States, is Just Capital, Just Capital. And they follow and hold companies accountable to what they're doing in the conscious business space. They don't necessarily call it conscious business space, but they might call it stakeholder capitalism, all kind of interchangeable terms. And what Just Capital does is actually survey the public about what they think the best companies should be doing. And then they match the top 50 of the Fortune 500, if I'm remembering this right, and match against those criteria and do some rankings and scorings. And they're really cool to watch how they're doing that. And that's kind of a newer thing for them. So another couple of places to look. And these are all sort of sister organizations working together. You'll see Conscious Capitalism, Just Capital, Imperative 21, like in a lot of the same forums, because we're all working together in some way. So we're not going to do the exercise. We don't generally do the exercises in this short of a deeper dive forum. But these are the types of things that if you were to embark on this in your company, there's some key questions that you can ask. We typically would ask founders, if this is something you're interested in your company, to explain why did they even found this company to begin with? Because there's usually a lot of hints in that. There is rarely a leader that would say at the time when they were being, an entrepreneur and just starting their business, well, I just founded this to make money. There's something that motivated them above and beyond that. They usually had a problem that they were trying to solve, an opportunity that they saw in some way. And there might be a higher purpose embedded in that. So we've talked about this a little bit, but if you're interested in discovering and activating your higher purpose, as we talked about, you can ask your stakeholders. This is designed, what you're seeing here is like designed for an in-person session. So there's like a worksheet that they would hand it out. And if anyone is interested in that worksheet, just put your name in the chat and I can certainly send it to you. And then creating a cohesive statement and socializing it. So I kind of just gave an example of that with my own business. And then bringing it into your company culture. So embedding that in everything you do, like we've talked about, and then making it stick like anything. You have to talk about it often. You have to keep cultivating it. You have to refresh it. I'm working with a great company now that has a really wonderful, inspiring purpose and a really great set of values, but they're like, we think we need to check out to see if this is still the right stuff for us as we go on the next leg of our journey. So this is something that's always living and breathing in the organization and that you're always updating and checking on. And then you're assessing with your stakeholders continuously. Oh, that looks like a duplicate, sorry. And if you haven't read the Conscious Capitalist Credo, have you ever seen it on the website before? Yeah, so hopefully when you read it, you also find it inspiring. This is just a little snippet from it where it's talking about that we can aspire to even more than what we have today. And the Conscious Capitalism Credo, if you haven't seen it, is much longer than this, and you might really like reading it. So you can go to Conscious Capitalism Inc. and find it right on the homepage. So I'm going to stop sharing and see what questions everyone has, or comments or thoughts or things that you want to do next. Anything is open for discussion.
I was curious, one thing that you were talking about with the higher purpose and then conscious leadership. So there's this sense that you were saying higher purpose is the foundation. I work with leaders, and in some ways I don't see how you wouldn't start with the leader. And then, that it feels like that's where you have to set the tone. That's where you have to get to that higher purpose. So
Yeah.
just curious what your reflections are on that.
Yeah, great point. Certainly to articulate the higher purpose, you need leaders in order to do that. So that's kind of why they're all intrinsically linked and not necessarily in a particular order. When you think about it from working with a CEO founder perspective, which is typically at least who you're primarily working with or is always involved in the articulation of the higher purpose, in order for them to build conscious leadership within their organization, they need to have declared the higher purpose, because what they're going to be asking their leaders to do along with themselves is that their primary priority or focus will be to fulfill that higher purpose. So there's absolutely no question. What you're saying is that you need conscious leadership. You need a leader to even see the need to be doing this to begin with. And that often comes from their own self-reflection and their own work and their often, deeper emotional intelligence about why they are here and what they really want to do and what mark they want to make on the world, and a deeper set of values. Like all of that typically exists. It might be raw materials to start with, but typically has to exist in order to initiate the higher purpose discussion. In my experience, and what we might say in a lot of spaces in the conscious business movement, you can't really talk. It's not our role to talk people into this. Like they either gravitate towards it or not. And we know that there's plenty of leaders that gravitate towards it that we can, bring along and help with tools and techniques and processes and helping them understand where they are on the journey and where they want to go next. And so you're kind of presuming that you're starting with the raw materials of having a conscious leader there, and that they just might need some help and coaching for sure. But that you're not trying to talk someone that is extremely profit driven and traditionally business minded into thinking about business in a different way. At least that's not where we're spending our effort at the moment. So hopefully, does that help answer it, Deidre?
Yeah.
There's like no right or wrong answer, I guess, to that. Everybody's right.
Yeah.
It's all included.
Yeah, it helps. Thank you.
Does anyone have another question or comment or thought, reflection? Was this helpful as a overview?
Very, thank you.
Great. Well, so glad to have had everybody here with us today, and glad that we're able to end on time, even though we started late. I did speed through some of the stuff, so if you think of any questions later, definitely don't hesitate to follow up. And we hope that we'll see you in an upcoming session where we're going through the other tenets, and then you start to see how the whole thing takes shape and starts to integrate together as you continue to do this work and continue to learn. So really appreciate your time today. Again, apologies for us getting started late, and thank you for your patience. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.